the microwave stand's on fire, I'm on fire, and all these shopping bags are on fire. All I could hear was my wife screaming from the door. So I start banging on windows, you know, leaving these bloody handprints everywhere. Hello, my name is Nate, and I am a 24-year-old burn survivor. On September 18th of 2022, I was caught in a house fire. I was actually in the basement at the time due to my pre-existing birth defect. I was born with a clubbed foot. And I know that's not the scientific name for it, but that's probably how most people would recognize it. So this is my right foot that I can hardly bend. That's all the mobility I have right there. And as a result of this, I had several surgeries as an infant, and they ended up casting my foot, I think it was at least 3 times. And they did all kinds of different surgery and stuff. My ankle itself has like 6 partial fusions in it. And they really didn't want to operate on that at all. Like any more than 3 fusions, they usually don't touch. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I happen to be in the basement. That's where I spent most of my time. Unfortunately, I was rather sedentary pre-fire. It's sad to say I'm actually more active now than I was then, and if anything, that's just because I know how to tolerate my pain a little bit better. Point being, I didn't get around very fast beforehand anyway. Just to give you guys a bit of a heads up, my descriptions are going to be pretty graphic going forward. So if you're squeamish, or if you're just not in the mood to hear about it today or right now, I'd probably click off or skip this part. I know I'm probably coming across pretty awkward on camera, but I'm really not used to doing this. Even when I recorded myself in the hospital, it was usually my wife recording me and me talking to doctors and stuff. So just me kind of one-on-one with the camera is very foreign. I'm doing my best because I really want to inspire people with my story and just help as many as I can. You know, if I can educate someone who's been in a similar situation, or someone who may know someone who's going through something similar, that's more worthwhile to me. When I was in the hospital, I was making some videos for Facebook just to kind of keep my friends and family updated. The whole time I was recording those videos, one of my underlying themes was vulnerability. So I need to stay true to that and just give you guys everything, the raw version of my story, because it's real. My wife is a baker by trade, and she was going to make donuts, and she was going to try out a new donut recipe. We started to preheat the oil, and we were using a thermometer and being responsible as usual. Had the temperature set to low. We were checking it frequently. And for some reason on this day, it just would not get hot. The oil was taking forever to heat up. Next thing you know, my cat starts causing chaos in the other room, and my wife needs to go check on him. And when she came back, the oil had actually reached its flash point, so it had caught on fire. Probably worth noting, I hadn't eaten yet this day, and it was about 4 or 5 p.m. This was on me, I know, but I was helping my wife bake, and I just got nice coffee into me. I was relaxing, getting ready to make supper. And then, yeah, next thing you know, all hell's breaking loose. I came upstairs from the basement, and I got straight to the kitchen because that's where the popping noises were coming from. And what I saw immediately was a plume of smoke at about eye level and a bright orange light, which I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. So it was strange. It was like the light from the fire was flickering off of the smoke and just bouncing around. It was terrifying, really. So we were using a Dutch oven, which I'm not sure if you're familiar. It's a cast iron pot, essentially. It's got 2 handles. It's pretty shallow. It would have been good for holding the heat, unfortunately. So the cast iron is on the stove, and there's probably like 1 foot tall orange flames just flicking up off of it. So the first thing I did was I took the lid and I tried to smother it, like suffocate the flame. That didn't really work. So all it did was it came out and over the lid, which was even more terrifying. And we had this wooden microwave stand right above the stove. You know, normally there's a little hood fan. Unfortunately not in these old military units, because what ended up happening was there's a layer of caked on grease underneath the microwave stand. So with that accumulation of grease, it took, you know, half a second of being on fire and it just lit up. My gut reaction was just get the fire out. And I don't mean put it out, I mean get it outside. So I figured, you know, if I can get it out of the kitchen and get it onto the pavement, then we're good to go. That wasn't quite the case. So what I did was I grabbed oven mitts, but instead of putting them on my hands completely, I just kind of wrapped them around the handles. And I think I'm better off for having done that because I was able to just drop them instead of having to remove them. But as soon as I picked up that pot, I immediately regretted it. So the flames that were licking the microwave stand now started touching my face. And I didn't have a whole big beard or anything at the time, but all I could smell immediately was burnt hair. So I knew it was touching my face. Like I could feel the warmth as soon as I walked upstairs. So that wasn't really an indicator, but after a few seconds, I could feel my face start to burn. So I picked up the Dutch oven and I started to get it outside. I'd turned. Very difficult to see at this point because even a few seconds in, like there was just so much smoke from that microwave stand that I started walking with the Dutch oven, and there was maybe 3 feet of clearance between my kitchen table and my fridge. I ended up tripping on one of my kitchen chairs. I spilled the oil all over my right arm, all over my hand, my feet. It wasn't good. So I knew immediately at that point that I had to get out of the house. I tripped on the kitchen chair and flames just erupted around me. We had some paper bags, you know, a few things on the floor so as soon as that oil spilled, all those shopping bags lit up, and now instead of one fire, we're dealing with at least 3. Just the microwave stand's on fire, I'm on fire, and all these shopping bags are on fire. To be totally honest, I think tripping over that chair is probably what saved me because I was inhaling so much smoke when I stood up, but it was, in the grand scheme, very minimal because I got low really, really fast. I probably wouldn't have done that if I was still holding the Dutch oven because I just wasn't really concerned with my own safety, maybe as much as I should have been. After I tripped, I ended up getting my foot stuck in that same chair. I kind of stepped into it as I fell. Getting out of the chair was my first priority, so I'm just pulling and pulling and pulling, and unfortunately, since this foot doesn't really bend, there wasn't a whole lot I could do, so I was starting to panic. Luckily, I was able to take half a breath and just unhook my foot and crawl out. All I could hear was my wife screaming from the door. She was very lucky to get out, and she was actually coming back in because I hadn't made it out yet, so I'm just also very, very lucky that she didn't injure herself in that process. So I get outside, I start rolling in the grass because I didn't even know if I was on fire yet, to be honest with you. Everything happened within probably 45 seconds. Like that's me from the basement upstairs, grabbing the pot, getting outside, 45 seconds. And the doctors had said if I had spent double the time, I probably would have gone from 20% coverage to 80% burn coverage, which would have been an entirely different story because there would have been much less skin for them to graft on to my burns. I noticed blood pouring down my forearm, and that's not a great sign. I could also see like the white under my skin from all the nerves. I also knew that wasn't good because I've taken first aid probably 5 or 6 times through cadets, so I'm not an expert in burns by any stretch, but I knew what to look out for as far as major damage. At this point, I'm going into shock. We're in a set of townhouses and we're right in the middle. Luckily, they had very good firewalls, so the fire didn't spread to either side. But you think we've got 4 sets of neighbors, and I'm concerned about them more than anything right now. Just got to make sure everyone gets out. So I start banging on windows, leaving these bloody handprints everywhere. As I'm banging on these windows, I'm starting to notice the damage I did. And the whole top of my hand was pretty much melted off, as well as a lot of the bottom of my palm. And that's just due to the way that I was holding the handles of the Dutch oven. Whenever the oil spilled over, it just kind of traced the outside of where I was grabbing them. So we're all attached. I'm running by, banging on windows. All the neighbors are outside and safe, luckily. Kim and Joe are neighbors from the far end of the complex where we used to live. Came out and they were talking to us, and they got me a blanket. And that really saved me because it was just so cold. It's the evening. It was right before fall. I'm just laying on the ground, shivering. That's the thing. Like, when you hear of these people that get burned really severely, at least in my experience, I always imagined you'd be really hot. But it's kind of the opposite. It's like you just start freezing. When you're missing that skin, your body loses heat a whole lot faster. As a result of that, actually, my thermoregulation, which is how your body controls its temperature, it was way out of whack up until like last month. So like 5 whole months. The room could be like 27 Celsius and I'd still be shivering. It would go the other way too. So if the room was really, really cold, I could be super warm. Like my body just didn't really know what was up. So my adrenaline's pumping. I feel the pain, but it hasn't fully set in yet. Like when you get burns that are that bad, it takes a few minutes before you really understand how much you hurt yourself. And I get to the front of the house, and my wife had opened the door to try and let some of the smoke out, which unfortunately ended up fanning the flame. But I mean, split-second decisions, like same as me. I can't fault her because my decision was a little dumber. And it's worth mentioning too that we have 2 kitties and a bunny. Unfortunately, only one of the cats was on the main floor. That's the one that was making all the chaos, all the ruckus. He was able to get downstairs to the basement, which was the only area that was semi-untouched by the fire. Unfortunately, the other 2 pets were all the way upstairs, so all the heat and the smoke didn't really give them much of a chance. And I know I don't need to, but part of me still feels really guilty for that. Sorry if I get a little emotional. It's kind of hard to talk about. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I'm still processing. But, and then I kept looking back into our house, trying to see if I could go in to get the pets. And I knew from the get-go this wasn't a good idea. But, I feel like every pet owner that really cares would be in a similar situation. I didn't go back in because I knew it wasn't the right decision. I knew that if they could be saved, then the firefighters would get them. But if they couldn't, it was already too late, and I was just putting myself at risk. I kind of came to terms with that. And I'm very, very happy that at least one of them was able to make it out. I started checking the door to see if any of the pets would come out, and all the flames just rushed right to the front, and then they started going up the carpeted stairs, and it was just a nightmare. Photobomb from Morty. That's actually the guy that survived the fire. Say hi, buddy. When I realized I couldn't go back in the front door, I kind of just took a few steps back, and I laid on the ground. I just started meditating, I guess. Nothing really sunk in yet. Obviously, when something this traumatic happens, like, it happened, but in the same breath, like, it takes a long time to process that kind of thing. Well, I'm on the ground for about 20 minutes waiting for the ambulance. I think we had 59 firefighters arrive on scene. There was very, very little they could do. I know that they did douse it quite a bit because the basement was full of water. It had seeped down through the floors. And that's actually why we couldn't keep any of our clothing or anything, was because I'd just done laundry and the bulk of everything we owned was down there. So anything that didn't get scorched was soaked. And there was asbestos in the floors that we weren't made aware of. So any of the water that ran through or the smoke that carried throughout the house was full of asbestos, meaning that we couldn't keep anything because it's not really something you can just wash out. The ambulance came and they brought me to my local hospital. We were told that my wife would be riding in the same ambulance as me, which was actually incorrect. The police had said they needed to ask her some questions, and they only asked her like what her name was, and then they let her go, but they also wouldn't let her drive to the hospital herself because she was shaken up. So I understand that, but why couldn't they have just asked her when she got there, or held up my ambulance for 2 seconds to ask a few questions? Like, it was just very frustrating because I was told she was going to be there with me and then she wasn't, and it was like $200 per ambulance, so they made her take a second ambulance, and it was just adding to the headache. We lost pretty much all the cash we had on hand, and we weren't really well off, so we didn't have a whole lot in our bank account. So that was kind of like the icing on the cake. We get to the hospital, and I'm immediately surrounded by nurses, doctors, firefighters, and I'll never forget, there's a nurse there, and meanwhile I'm in pain, not on any kind of drugs yet. I'm just trying to, keep meditating. This is kind of how I got through the initial shock and pain, and I figure, if I could just breathe deep, slow, I'd stay calm. But I'll never forget these words. And she said to me, "You just got to be able to laugh about it." I was like, "Seriously? You're going to say that right now?" "Yeah, well, you just got to be able to laugh about it." And I'm like, "Well, you're not wrong, but like maybe give me some time to process this first. In a few months, I'll be able to laugh about it, but not right after it happened." Within a few hours, I ended up getting airlifted to Halifax. I myself am from PEI, Prince Edward Island, and we're not really burn specialists here. Whereas in Halifax, they do have a lot of people that are very well versed. So in my local hospital, the last thing I remember was they gave me some ketamine, and I'm not sure what else, but as I could tell, I was really looped up. And I was like, "Nope, no more, please, no more, I'm good." Until, I'm going to be airlifted. So as I'm being airlifted, I actually started to wake up. And this was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had because it's a bit of an irrational fear for me. People waking up on the operating table and stuff. What if the anesthesia doesn't last as long as it's supposed to? Or what if they didn't give me enough? Or, there's a bunch of stuff running through my head. And then I couldn't see anything, but I remember hearing the helicopter. And I used to work on jet engines, so I'm pretty familiar with what they sound like. All I can remember is trying to move my head, because I couldn't move my arms. I think they might have been strapped down. So I was trying to move my head so that they would realize that I'd woken up. And all I heard was, "Oh, and that was it. They must have increased whatever I was on, and I was back under, but super scary. Just not really knowing what's going on, hearing stuff, not being able to see stuff. It was sketchy, to say the least. When I got to Halifax, I had the most amazing team of doctors and nurses, occupational and physical therapists. They were just all fantastic. I feel very fortunate personally, even though, I was injured. I'm very glad that my wife wasn't. And even more so, I'm glad that my son wasn't home. He turns 1 tomorrow. And he should have been home, which is kind of the scariest part. My grandmother normally takes him on Saturdays, but this week she just happened to have an event to go to on a Saturday, and she asked if she could take him on Sunday. We usually do an overnight visit, but this was a day visit. Just so fortunate that he was out of the house, because had I have had to go all the way upstairs, because we had 2 flights of stairs in that house, and I don't want to think about the possibilities of what could have happened, even just with smoke inhalation. Very, very scary stuff. Like I said, I'm so thankful my wife wasn't injured and my boy wasn't home, because in my opinion, it was like the best of a worst case scenario. If I had to pick any one of the 3 of us to get hurt, it would be me, hands down. Not that I would like any of us to be injured, but I mean, if you gotta pick one. I will acknowledge that I'm very, very fortunate for how my face looks now. If I have a couple drinks or if I get really, really warm, you'll see I kind of these little blush spots on my forehead and my nose and my cheeks. but it could have been so much worse. I just feel very grateful all around, as much as it's awful and we lost everything. I just try not to focus on that aspect of it too much, you know? I don't want to bury it either. Like, I've processed it. I spoke to a burn psychologist once a week and we talked through everything, but I try to focus on the silver linings and the positives, because there's no point dwelling on all the negatives or things you wished you could have changed. If everyone else is fantastic, I can't ask for much more. Thank you again for your time and listening to me ramble. It really means a lot.
My pedals a little too sensitive. Downshifting through a 35, and she told me she loved to ski. Well, I guess we both white line certified. Gotta get it and go. Hey, off with the top.